Thanks for joining me on episode 537 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
Hey, I'm Matt Ham, author of Redefine Rich, and I challenge you to live richly by listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
Much more intentionally. Intentionality of our life is what God wants for us. God wants us to live a life of intention. God wants us to go out and be in the world, serving the world, but not be of the world. Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world. In today's Spiritual Foundation episode about investing in yourself, I talk with you about living from where you are, why you need to know where you came from, even if you're not happy about it, and how where you are and where you came from fit together as you move forward. One of those expressions that gets thrown around a lot is, go from where you are. Sometimes you'll hear it as lead from where you are, or work from where you are, or live where you're at. And these things are often really important. This idea of being comfortable where you are, even if you're moving or driving or trying to build something different, is one of those important both and concepts that we have in a lot of spiritual thinking. And I honestly believe this is a spiritual thought process. This is one of these things where we have to learn to hold ourselves mentally in a special place. And this heart and mind fitting, the way we think about things, is important when it comes to being able to live in the world and serve people in the world, and yet not allow ourselves to be influenced by the world, not allow ourselves to be part of the culture of the world in a very real way. If you tuned in over the weekend and you watched the big game and you saw the Super Bowl, and then the next day there's a ton of messages about how the halftime show was great or how it was terrible, how it reflected on us as a culture and as a community, whether it was something that aligned with your particular values or not. And the truth is, in some ways, I get that. I get that debate about thinking about what's going on around us and looking at it and thinking about, does this fit in with our family? Does this fit in with the values we want to put out in the world? And I think that's an important thing to do and to recognize. But it's also important to recognize the fact that it doesn't necessarily create anything that you have to do. That by looking at that, you can decide, this is not representative of who I am. I honestly don't watch the Super Bowl, and I haven't for years, and I haven't missed it. We don't even watch network television in our house. My son really doesn't have any shows that he's addicted to because it's just never been part of our family culture. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's the way to live, or this is the only thing that you can do, or this is a good thing. I'm saying that as our family, this is what we've established as part of who we are. And you need to find out and recognize and build your own family culture. You need to live where you are. And that family culture, it doesn't matter whether you have kids or don't have kids. It doesn't matter whether you have a spouse or a partner or you're single. You still need to establish what your core values are. And you need to live from where you are. You need to figure out where you are to even begin to have a hope of knowing where you're going. And as part of that, part of that reflection, and sometimes the part that can be really uncomfortable for us, is you need to look back and know where you came from too. Some of the Super Bowl commercials that were on talked about how people have grown up in a certain way. It talked about the environment that they were raised in. There was one great commercial where the father was talking to the son about where he came from and talking about, I don't know what I would have said to myself when I was a younger self. One of the things that we do oftentimes when I'm working with clients is we think about our family of origin. We need to identify the patterns of our life that came to us from where we came from. How we were raised, what was said to us when we were a kid, the environment that we were growing up in, all of these things, whether you like it or you don't, affect who you are today. And out of that, how it affects you, how it reaches you is part of what happens when you think about where you are. But only if you're conscious about it, only if you deliberately pay attention to it. And these things fit together to give you an opportunity to live into the future much more intentionally. Intentionality of our life is what God wants for us. God wants us to live a life of intention. God wants us to go out and be in the world, serving the world, but not be of the world. And the only way to do that is to figure out where you are, so that you can have a solid ground to stand on when you go forward to where you want to be. Thanks for listening. Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor. Go over to facebook.com/inspired stewardship and like our Facebook page and mark it that you'd like to get notifications from us so that we can connect with you on Facebook and make sure that we're serving you to the best of our abilities with time and tips there. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.